Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again. I think it's great fun to host themed dinner parties. Last week we cooked a St. Patrick's Day themed dinner, and if you missed that episode, I hope you will give it a watch. Today I'm doing a Julia Child themed dinner, and all of the recipes are from Julia Child's The Way to Cook cookbook. Here's the menu. I'm serving a French onion soup infused with brandy and vermouth for the first course, a luxurious Zinfandel of beef for the main course, rice and broccoli florets for the vegetable sides, and a shimmering apple tart tatin for the grand finale. Now the dinner is scheduled for tomorrow, so today I'm going to do some prep, starting with the French onion soup. And for the soup, I need onions. I also need 1 onion for the Zinfandel of beef. And I will talk more about Julia as we proceed with the recipes. One of the highlights of my life was meeting Julia. And I selected all of these recipes because they can be prepped ahead of time. So I need 8 cups or 2.5 pounds of onions for the French onion soup, and I need just 1 large onion for the Zinfandel of beef. And to make life easier, I'm going to use not the shredding disc, but the slicing disc on my food processor. Boy, that's fast. Et voila, all of the onions are sliced. My dog is so funny. When she hears, well, if you hear a dog barking, what she's barking at is the backup signal from a truck that's somewhere outside. So I can reserve what is the equivalent of 1 large onion right here for the Zinfandel of beef. And then we're going to caramelize the remaining onions. So I have set my large skillet, which has a cover, over medium heat, and I'm adding 3 tablespoons of butter and about 1 tablespoon of avocado oil. Once the butter melts, add in the onions. And per Julia, I also need to add a ½ teaspoon each of both sugar and salt. Give the onions a stir. And then cover the pot until the onions become translucent. That will take about 10 minutes. And once the onions are soft and translucent, I will turn up the heat and stir the onions frequently until they turn a walnut brown. In other words, until they completely caramelize and turn very sweet. And while the onions are caramelizing, I need to heat 2.5 quarts of beef broth. This is my own homemade beef broth. I need to heat it to a simmer. And I'm going to heat this in my microwave just to make life easier. And by the way, Julia Child was not opposed to microwave ovens. In fact, she loved all kinds of kitchen gadgets. What makes this soup so uniquely Julia Child wonderful is the addition of both brandy and French vermouth. But first I have to make a roux for the onions. And my onions are very much caramelized. They look gorgeous. They smell just fantastic. So now I'm going to stir in 2 tablespoons of flour, and I will stir the flour into the onions for about 2 minutes just to cook the flour. And you do want to cook the flour, otherwise the soup can taste like flour. And the roux, well, once we add the beef stock, this roux will thicken the stock just enough so that the onions are held in suspension. Following Julia Child's instructions, I'm now adding 2 cups of the hot broth to the skillet. As the broth comes to a boil, I will scrape the bottom of the skillet to deglaze it. Then I will add the remaining broth plus 1 cup of dry vermouth and 5 tablespoons of brandy. Then we can cover the skillet and let the soup simmer quietly for 1.5 hours. And while the soup is simmering, I'm going to get cleaned up here. Also, I need to wash out and dry my food processor because I'm going to use it to make the pastry dough for the tart tatin dessert. All right, my food processor is all washed and dried. My soup is still simmering away. My whole kitchen smells just divine. So I'm going to go ahead and make the pastry dough for the tart tatin. To make the pastry dough, tip 1.5 cups of flour, a pinch of salt, and 113 grams of cold diced butter into the bowl of a food processor. Pulse the machine several times to break up the butter. Then, with the machine running, pour 1/3 cup of cold water through the feed tube. Stop processing when the dough comes together. Gather the dough into a ball, flatten it into a disc, and then enclose it in cling film. The dough needs 30 minutes of chill time in the refrigerator. I will chill my dough overnight. This soup smells just incredible, and the broth has reduced, which means the soup will be extra yummy. Oh, there's a little whiff of the brandy and the vermouth, but of course the alcohol has boiled out. Now I want to put this soup, in a proper soup pot, because this great big giant skillet will not fit in my refrigerator. And I'm going to refrigerate this overnight, and then tomorrow I can reheat it shortly before serving time. And I'm going to serve this alongside some grated cheese, which guests can add if they so choose. I'm not going to do the bistro style French onion soup that is served in little crockery and with a toasted baguette and cheese on top, because that really is a full meal all by itself. So I will offer bread and I will offer cheese, and if people want to enjoy the soup with bread and cheese, they may. But this soup is wonderful all on its own. So I will let this soup cool to room temperature, and then I will cover it and refrigerate it overnight. And tomorrow we will make the Zinfandel of beef, and we will finish the tart tatin. So sweet dreams, my friends. I will see you in the morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited because we are going to make Julia Child's Zinfandel of beef today. We're also going to finish the dessert. So I have about 3 pounds of the chuck roast, the cut up chuck roast that you and I bought together at Guido's late last week. And I need to dry this meat because wet meat won't brown properly. Now, I have made many variations of Julia's Zinfandel beef, but I've never made Julia's actual recipe for Zinfandel beef. And I'm going to follow the recipe as closely as possible. I need to brown this meat, and I'm going to use my electric skillet because it just affords more surface room. And then I need just a light coating of oil. I'm using avocado oil here. And I'm going to brown the meat on all sides. That's going to take about 5 minutes. You're good and brown here, so now I can transfer the meat to a covered casserole. This is a 5-quart Dutch oven, enameled cast iron. One of the things Julia taught me early on is that you should never crowd the beef when you are browning it, because then the beef will steam rather than brown. One more piece over here. And then have some vegetables we need to brown. We need to add a little more oil. And I have the sliced onion that we prepared yesterday. In you go. I also have garden carrot that I sliced up. I'm going to toss these about until they start to brown. Browning or caramelizing the vegetables just gives them an abundance of flavor. And while we're waiting on the veggies, I might as well open my bottle of Zinfandel. This is a red wine. I was lucky to find it at a local liquor store. Oh, it has a nice fragrance. And I think these are brown enough now, so I'm going to transfer them to the Dutch oven. Then I have a lot of fond at the bottom of this skillet, so I want you to glaze it with some of the Zinfandel. Scrape up all these stuck-on bits. And I can pour this liquid right into the Dutch oven. Now I need 2 to 3 cloves of garlic. This is the homegrown garlic that you and I harvested and froze together last fall. And I need some chopped tomato, dried thyme. I also need a Turkish bay leaf. And you and I bought a bottle of Turkish bay leaves at Guido's last week. I don't know what I did with those bay leaves. They're not in my spice drawer or my seasoning drawer. I don't know. Maybe they fell out of the bag into the car. But we're going to have to do without Turkish bay leaves today. I also need salt. Julia doesn't mention black pepper, but I'm going to add it anyway. Then I need to add my Zinfandel. So she says use enough of the wine to just cover the ingredients. And to add more wine or beef stock if necessary. Let's see how we are here. I think these ingredients are pretty much covered. Now, I may need a little more wine. Actually, I'm going to add some of my remaining homemade beef stock. Very good, Kevin. Then I need to bring this to a simmer on the stovetop, and I'm going to preheat my oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And while we wait for the Zinfandel beef to come to a simmer, going to get cleaned up here. My stew has come to the simmer, and my whole house smells just incredible. So now I can transfer the stew to my preheated 325 degree Fahrenheit oven. And it's going to take probably 2.5 hours, maybe even 3 hours for this meat to become meltingly tender. So now we can move on to la tarte tatin. And the first thing we need are 5 or 6 apples. These are the Ida Red apples that you and I bought together at Golden Harvest Farm last week. And I'm going to use my new buddy here. This is called the Rotato. We used it when we did the St. Patrick's dinner to peel potatoes. And now we can see what kind of job it does for peeling apples. Working. Didn't peel the bottom, but that's okay. It's doing most of the work. Apple peel noodles. And I just have to tidy up the peeling a little bit. So next, I need to core the apples. And I have my handy apple corer right here. Then I need to toss the apples with a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar and the juice and zest from 1 lemon. Now, I have made this tarte tatin in the past. It is honestly one of my favorite desserts. And I'm just tossing everything together here. And she says to let these sit for 20 minutes. And while we wait on the apples, I'm going to fetch the pastry dough that you and I made together yesterday. And here is the pastry dough, which is now hard as a rock because it was in the refrigerator overnight. I'm going to lightly flour my pastry cloth here. And we can let the pastry dough warm up just a little bit to make it easier to roll out. Meantime, I need to drain the apples. They have exuded a lot of juice. Then, for the caramel, I need 6 tablespoons of butter, which I'm going to dice. And I need to melt the butter in my cast iron skillet. Well, let me show you. So I have a well-seasoned cast iron skillet. Your skillet needs to be oven-proof, both flame-proof and oven-proof. And this skillet is 10 inches in diameter. In goes the butter. And I'm going to melt the butter on the stovetop and then add the cup of sugar. And my lower oven has just preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. My butter has melted, so now we can add the sugar. Slowly stir the sugar and butter mixture until it turns a rich caramel brown. This will take only a few minutes. Now, off heat, I need to arrange the apple slices on top of the caramel. So I like to arrange the apples in concentric circles. Of course, you have to be careful here because the caramel is ripping hot. And that's the decorative layer, which will be on public view. And then the rest of the apples can just be poured on top. And they will cook down. We're going to return this to the stove top and cover it, and then periodically baste the apples. And let the apples cook over medium-low heat until they've really softened. That's going to take about 10 minutes. And while we wait for the apples to soften, I'm going to start rolling out my pastry dough. So I have a 10-inch skillet, which means I need to roll this dough into an 11-inch diameter circle. My dough is still a little firm, so I'm going to soften it up. And then I want to roll this out. When I roll pastry, I always start at the center and then roll towards the edge, about a ½ inch or so from the edge. In other words, I never go over the dough. And I think I learned this technique from Julia Child. I actually met Julia in 1998, and it was the highlight, one of the highlights of my life. It was certainly the highlight of 1998. It was at a book signing, and she was there with Jacques Pepin. It was an outdoor thing in New York City, and there was a line of people who wanted Julia Child to sign their various cookbooks. And I had my book, The Way to Cook, and Julia saw me in line, and I was pretty young then, and she saw how nervously excited I was, and she kept looking over at me. And so when it came my time to approach Julia, she stood up and gave me a hug. It was totally unexpected. And I asked her about these egg poaching gadgets that she had described. I think it's in this book. And I said, I couldn't find them anywhere. I mean, this is before Amazon existed. And she said, oh, they sell them at Williams-Sonoma. And then she stood up and shouted to, I think, her assistant. I can't remember her assistant's name, but she stood up and shouted, let's say her assistant's name was Gladys. Gladys, where is the nearest Williams-Sonoma? Well, it turned out there was a Williams-Sonoma just up the block. So after my time with Julia, I went over to Williams-Sonoma and I bought the egg poaching gadgets. And of course, I grew up watching Julia. I watched the black and white original series called The French Chef, and then all of the series that she made thereafter. Just always loved her. And there we are, 11 inches in diameter. And here are the softened, beautifully caramelized apples. Now, for this next step, I need to put the pastry dough on top. So I fold this into a triangle, center the point, and then open. And I'm going to push the edge into the caramel. Knife might be handy here. There we are. Then I need to poke some steam vents in the pastry. I will bake this tart for exactly 20 minutes. And while the tart tatin is baking, I'm going to get cleaned up here. And then I want to prep the broccoli that I will serve with the, well, I will serve it alongside the Zinfandel of beef. So this is the absolutely gorgeous broccoli that you and I bought together at Guido's in Great Barrington. And I just need to cut it into florets. Broccoli was one of the suggested accompaniments to the Zinfandel beef in Julia's book. I'm dressing the broccoli florets with olive oil, salt, and pepper. And then toss. I'm going to pop this into the refrigerator until it's time to cook it off. Now, another project I want to do today is try to cobble together a flower arrangement for the dining table. We made an arrangement when we did the St. Patrick's Day dinner with some greens and some huge blue hydrangeas, but the hydrangeas have since faded. But I have some other flowers from other arrangements in the house, and some of those flowers are still in good shape. So, as I said, we will cobble together an arrangement from the flowers I already have on hand. And here is our stunningly beautiful tart tatin. I need to unmold this. Now, Julia says if the juices in the pan are extremely runny, to go ahead and just set the pan over a low flame on the cooktop and let the juices boil down. But mine look pretty syrupy and thick, so I'm going to go ahead and unmold this. Say a prayer for me, please. Here goes nothing. Voila. My friends, this is spectacular. I mean, it turned out beautifully. I'm going to let this cool. Meantime, we can work on that flower arrangement. Yes, I think this turned out just beautifully. Let me clean up, and then we have another step to perform on that Zinfandel beef. So my Zinfandel beef is all cooked, and I just have to consult with Julia because we have to strain the ingredients and then make something called a beurre blanc. Set the saucepan here. Oops, that didn't work well. Then I need to wash out the pot. And Julia says to press down on the meat and the vegetables to release the juice. So that was 2 tablespoons of butter and 3 tablespoons of flour. And then we mash the butter and flour together. And this beurre blanc is going to create a liaison. Now we can add this beurre blanc to the liquid from the stew. Then I need to wash my hands, and we're going to bring this to a boil. And while that is coming to a boil, I need to clean up the big mess I just made. I think probably it's better to mix the butter and flour together with a spoon rather than your fingers. We can put we turn our meat to the pot, and I will whisk the butter mixture into the hot broth until it thickens, which it is doing already. Look at that. And I just learned a new French technique. Now we can pour the sauce over the meat and vegetables. Oh yes, it does a wonderful job of coating everything. In fact, it makes all of the ingredients in the stew glisten. I've decided that I should serve this Zinfandel of beef in a copper pot. In you go. And I have to try just one small piece of beef. Super tender, super delicious. Into the warming oven. And I'm going to warm up the soup that we made yesterday, and I'm going to pass this shredded Swiss cheese. I didn't have Gruyere, so Swiss cheese it is, and if anyone wants to put Swiss cheese on their French onion soup, they may. We are getting close to serving time, so I'm going to pop my broccoli into a preheated 400-degree Fahrenheit oven until the broccoli has caramelized. That will take about 20 minutes. I'm also going to prepare some rice, but you've seen me prepare rice 100 times, so I'm going to do that off camera. My spouse and our friends Paul and David joined us for this Julia Child-themed dinner. The dinner, I'm happy to report, received rave reviews. Thank you, Julia. In the early 1990s, before I was married, and when I was definitely living alone, I actually taught myself how to cook by cooking my way through almost all of the recipes in this Julia Child book. So this dinner party was a lot of fun for me to do, and I hope it was fun for you as well. Everything we made today was very easy to do and super, super delicious. In the next episode, we are going to go antiquing or maybe just thrifting in Millerton, New York, and I hope you will join us. And until then, please treat yourself very, very well, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye for now, friends.